Morning all. A very exciting encounter yesterday in the Sinquefield Cup. Round 4 was between Fabiano Caruana playing white and Levon Aronian playing black. So Levon Aronian currently the rank 2 in the world, just a few points higher than Caruana, ranked 3. So e4 from Fabiano, and we see e5, knight f3, knight c6, and the classic Ruy Lopez here, bishop b5. a6, the bishop drops back, knight f6. Okay, so still Ruy Lopez terror shape, very classic, white castles, bishop e7, and now we have a bit of a departure. Usually this is often played, this is the second most popular, but we see d3, this is also quite popular as well. d3 sometimes gets a shield. If black is going to fianchetto the bishop here, this is a very solid structure against such a bishop fianchetto. So let's see what Levon Aronian plays here. It avoids a lot of the theory like the Marshall Gambit. So black played b5, bishop b3, and now black castled, and here white improved control of the d5 square with this move knight c3. I think this has been mentioned by Nigel Short in some commentaries. It seems a very, very sensible move to increase the grip on d5 here. There's not much of a downside, I think, to this. It has been played with some success. Also there's rook e1 and there's a4, that's been played before. So knight c3, d6, and with this the bishop is not fianchettoing here. As I say, this is a kind of rock formation against that bishop, but instead it's going to challenge this bishop on b3. Also, black is now potentially threatening knight a5 just to steal that bishop. There's no retreat for it. Before, the e5 pawn would have been hanging. If you look at this position, if it been played before, we just safely take on e5, but as soon as this is protected, now black's really seriously threatening knight a5, and white now plays a3, so that gives a little retreat square with knight a5, and that's actually played, bishop a2, and now black does actually challenge this bishop with bishop e6, and it looks as though it's not really that interesting in some respects to take here, because okay, although the pawns are doubled here, they're in the center and they're controlling some key central squares, you might think, and also there's this f-file pressure. But actually this is what Fabiano plays. Bishop takes e6, and the evaluation shoots to about equal from an engine perspective. The engines were kind of moaning about this. They're saying well, my engine is saying b4 or rook e1, just not taking on e6. So taking on e6, f takes. Right, so what actually has happened here? Why would white go in for this? Well, this could be a target to knight g5 later. These pawns are a bit committed. That e5 pawn in particular can't be supported by a fellow pawn as easily if it is attacked later. Let's see what happens. First b4, so the knight goes back to c6. It would look very miserable to go to b7 actually, so at least on c6 controlling that central square. Now we see bishop d2, and here it looks as though white positionally might start to threaten a4. This structure is a convenient target here if black doesn't do anything. For example, okay, let's give an example of this. King h8, a4. What does black do here? If knight takes, queen b1, this position might start to favour white. This queenside initiative looks quite good here. Rook b8, c4, and you see that this structure has got some fluidity issues, and there's pressure now on black emerging here. Also this e6 can be a target here in this position, so it's not all rosy with this structure in the centre. This can kind of demonstrates that even f4 now is on the cards. So yeah, this kind of queenside initiative is perhaps to be a concern for black. So Levon reacts though with a move which at some level seems to have quite an obvious downside to it. If we think of chess as like double-edged swords a lot of the time, concepts and moves, the move was d5. Engines actually don't like this, and I think really the problem is it has loosened that e5 pawn, but how to actually use that pressure? If white plays e takes d5 here, then that's simply undoubling the pawns, actually getting ideal pawns in the centre, and this might not be that easy to exploit. Say rook e1. The suggestion from the engine is actually queen d7. I think it's because this f file is dynamic compensation here. If we ever take like this, I think this could be asking for a bit of trouble. Things like knight g4 and bishop d6 look interesting. So here we see a lot of dynamic pressure on white's kingside and without the defensive knight. So is that really the way to go for e5? Not really. It doesn't seem as though that's a very, very safe way at all to play e takes d5. Instead, rook e1 was played. Now black doesn't want a totally wretched formation by playing d takes. That looks entirely wretched after knight takes e4, with e5 coming onto frontal attack pretty soon after that. Black actually played queen d6 here, again inviting this ed if there is going to be pressure on e5 frontally. But no, now here a very neat, interesting positional maneuver, which I'm not sure many people will think is that harmful necessarily, but the move is knight a2. This reminds me culturally, there's a classic Capablanca-Alekhine game in the World Championship match where Alekhine won a key game for manoeuvring a knight to basically c4 in one game. It was like a similar kind of knight manoeuvre like this is implied, or the knight can actually have an option of going to a5, and this could be an important option as well to undermine e5, that e5 pawn. So this is a very, very interesting manoeuvre, knight a2. Does white have time for this, you think? Isn't there some punishment? Well, say d takes. I don't think this is that punishing. D takes, say here. Things are protected here. Knight c1 is now possible, and in fact, knight d3 might also be useful to put pressure on e5, and then bishop c3, and you can see that e5 will come under great scrutiny. So, okay, after knight a2, knight d7 is played, and that looks to have a few ideas for black to maneuver, but it also implies that this knight is a bit fragile. If the queen moves away from here, it looks as though there's going to be an exchange sacrifice of interest. As an example, say the queen wanted to go here to try and do this. Rook takes f3 is already on the cards here. This is actually better for black. So white seems to be a bit passive because of this dynamic f-file pressure at this very moment. So queen e2 serves two purposes. It keeps an eye on f3, and also frontally on e5 it could be useful. And here black takes the decision to close things up in the center. This central tension now is resolved with d4. The engine suggests actually not to do that. Bishop f6 is mentioned, and say after bishop c3, it seems as though black has a tiny advantage here from an engine point of view, and this maneuver seems a long way off to do anything. These two squares seem covered by the knights respectively, so I'm not entirely sure if this pressure can be built up. It looks as though there's a kind of defensive stance on the e5 against white's stance for e5, but it doesn't seem entirely terrible for black, this position. So this again is, if we go back to queen e2, this again is a slightly controversial decision in closing the center, fixing black's pawns. And we see now another curious move, rook eb1, so supporting b4, and now maybe this knight c3 maneuver is going to happen, with potentially a4 in the future, maybe if needed. We see knight b6 though now, and it looks as though knight a4 is very, very interesting to kind of blockade white on the queen side. In fact, after knight c1, knight a4 is actually played. Now we see knight b3, so it's a battle of knight maneuvers, very cute knight maneuvers from both sides here on this queen side. But black has seemingly taken away any c3 break intention. There'll be drastic punishment, not just for d3, but there's too much pressure on c3 right now. And in fact, it seems after rook f7, who wouldn't take black here? It looks as though black is comfortably doubling rooks against f3. Well, we see now rook c1, a very calm move, as though the c3 break is actually on, or c4. Now, and if black radically tries to stop that, I don't think this does any good here. Maybe taking is not the best, though. It gives black that d4 square, but possibly queen f1 or queen e1. This might be possible with knight c5 next. The knight's not actually doing any concrete damage just yet. So, okay, these are very interesting possibilities. Black actually played, Levon Aronian played rook d8, as though this is really severely discouraged now, this d3 pawn, any notion of c3 or c4 discouraged. Now we see knight g5 hitting the rook and e6. The rook goes to f6, and now queen h5, a forcing move. Looking at h7, how does black defend this? If rook h6, then actually the f7 square is available for a check. This is an interesting position. White can play here h4. h4 here in this position. What's going on? If rook takes h4, knight takes e6. So this is starting to be a bit awkward for black. If taking, giving up the bishop, dark square bishop, this is comfortable for white, this position. Two rooks with a queen here is okay. If the rook moves, okay, this is okay. So white's got some positional advantage in terms of, well, there's a misplaced rook here for a start. So that's a very interesting position. So let's go back. So queen h5, instead of rook h6, h6, which seems like a sensible eviction with tempo. The knight goes to f3, but look at the e5 pressure. There's some lateral pressure now on e5 existing in this position. Black doubles rooks. Again, though, on the surface, it looks as though black, Levon Aronian, is very, very comfortable here. Black's rooks seem quite optimal and useful on that f off, this potential exchange sack, or just pressure on f2, whilst white's rooks seem passive. This knight here seems to be single-handedly discouraging c3 along with this structure. It seems quite passive. So let's see what happens here. Rook f1 is played. Was black actually threatening anything major? I'm not entirely sure there was a major threat from black there. Rook f1. I think it gives the idea that maybe the knight's going to move one day, and then even f4 might be possible. Rook a f7, rook a e1, bishop f8, and now we see h3, and this does mean a knight maneuver is now possible, knight h2 technically, for knight g4, and actually that would be embarrassing to the f6 rook. The f6 rook doesn't seem to have too many squares on this particular knight maneuver, and it seems actually, can this queen be attacked? Well, it is attacked to interrupt white's plans. g6, queen h4, queen e7. Now the queen goes to g3. Okay, and looking at e5 here. So black now parries this with bishop g7 indirectly. This looks as though knight e5 is pretty poisoned. Let's have a quick look. Knight takes e5, knight takes, queen takes. Does black have a strong move? Well, I think in this position rook takes f2, but still, even in this position, white should be okay. It seems queen g3, and white's okay here. If the rooks come off, this apparently is okay for white. this position. Nothing special, nothing to write home about equal. So, okay, so instead, after this bishop g7, knight, this is a really interesting point in the game where there's pressure on e5, which is being tactically defended by this bishop, by this double attack idea. But can we say the principle of the e5 weakness remains here? And it looks as though white, even though white had passive rooks throughout all of this and black's had the aggressive rooks, white still has that nagging pressure on e5. And actually does something really quite special here. Indeed, very, very special. White plays knight a5, which seems an ordinary move on the surface, just to undermine the defender of the e5 pawn. Now black takes this. Let's see now, in this position, let's say white takes here. This actually wasn't played. In this position, actually, black is eyeing a3. That's a special point of note. And the e5 square can be protected by rook takes f3 now, quite radically. So the bishop's now protecting e5. What's going on in this position? Well, actually g6 is under fire, so I'm not entirely sure this is a good move. Queen takes g6, white is actually better there. But with queen f6, it seems this is potentially a good positional blockade attempt from black. This kind of position looks as though there's still a3 pressure. It looks as though this might be interesting for black, but yeah, white still has apparently some theoretical advantage, but it seems difficult to try and win from this position. So in this position, after knight takes a5, something else was chosen. In fact, a fantastic idea of a piece sack. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5 actually takes away the c6 retreat. This knight's now attacked, and the rook's attacked. Knight b7. So it's one pawn. White doesn't really want to win the exchange here. That's not much to win the exchange here, giving up basically two knights for a rook. This position is nothing that special for white, even though it's not entirely terrible either. No, white goes for more here. White actually takes another pawn. So it's a piece sacrifice for two pawns right now. Is this really sound? And this comes after, like, you know, Magnus Carlsen's piece sacrifice against Caruana. Caruana's now done a piece sack for two pawns. But what actually can black do here? If black gives up the exchange here, it doesn't seem that favourable. Queen takes g6. Let's say queen f6, queen g4. White's looking forward in this position to things like f4 and e5 with sustained pressure. Actually, that could be a very, very difficult position for black to play. So actually, Levon in this position, after knight takes g6, he plays actually queen d8, and now we see e5 hitting the rook, rook f5, f4. So this takes away some squares. It protects that e5 even more. This knight's kind of ruled out of the game right now. It hasn't got any squares to get to that easily. Black tries now c5. This might not technically be the best. In this position, the engines suggest knight c3 as an idea. It's quite a complicated position, but after queen f3, looking at b7, this is potentially quite unpleasant for black. A very difficult position, really, to assess the compensation. But anyway, c5 was played. So looking at this structure, maybe even c4 later. Knight h4. White's going to win that exchange. Could black have done something about that? Not really. It was a bit awkward not to lose the exchange here. Well, the rook Can try and save itself for a moment though with rook h5, but it seems entirely misplaced. It's attacking the knight goes back, but the rook seems really misplaced. And in this position, it can't simply go back that easily now to f5. If it goes back to f5 here, this wasn't played, then actually the move queen g6 now threatens g4 to win the rook, or win the exchange after rook takes f4. This is unpleasant for black. I think this position, say queen e7, and it is actually quite complicated. G4 here is okay, but there might even be stronger in taking here first and taking on d4, even taking on d4. It seems, you know, black's pawns are evaporating, and white's got these multiple options to either go for pawns or win the exchange. Okay, so after knight f3, king h7 was played, and we see now queen g4, the rook goes back, bit of a dance here. Now knight h4. Okay, now here white's got a much keener interest to win the exchange, so it would basically be 2 knights given up for a single rook. But there's pawns as well. There's those pawns that were won. White has every single pawn, 8 pawns. Black has 6 pawns. So 2 pawns up. And, okay, getting a rook there. Now queen g6, looking at e6. So the pressure doesn't end here. And also, if you look at white's pieces, they're about to explode into action after g4 and f5, looking at h6. Really stretch out this bishop. These rooks are really stretching out. Not to mention the avalanche of pawns coming white's way. It's difficult position for black. This very, very difficult at move 39. Black tries queen e7 and we see g4. White is just simply expanding here ruthlessly with f5 now. These knights, dare I say, are spectator knights here. So spectating on the queen side, not doing much against white's imminent f6 now. Ouch, move being threatened. So black decides to try a trade of queens here. White doesn't mind this exchange of queens. White takes on e8 and plays f6. Huge space advantage. And dangerous past f pawn here. f7, which gives the f6 square for white. Now rook f6. Now bishop takes h6 is on the cards. You might think, can black just defend this with, let's say, king h7. If king h7 is played, tactically though, this fails. Bishop takes h6 here. If takes, we can take this because of this queening move. So this will be very, very unpleasant for black. Just rook f1 here and then rook h8. So okay, so very, very unpleasant position here. On king g7, I think just bishop takes h6 check is good. So Levon is in serious trouble. Knight b6 was played, bishop takes h6. Knight d7, trying to evict the rook. The rook doesn't need to go back. That would lose the bishop anyway. No, white's just giving up the exchange here with this one. Prepared to give up the exchange now. But after knight takes f6, there's also options. This wasn't played. I think there's just bishop takes f8, in fact. Stronger than rook takes f6, just bishop takes f8. And this position here, after taking here, is much better for white. There's still f7 on the cards. And there's bishop takes c5, and then the king can actually just come up for these pawns. It's horrible. There's a pass pawn here if that's ever taken. So no, this stuff is to be avoided. Knight takes f6 doesn't really help black at all after bishop takes f8. So we see c takes b4, a takes b4. White is actually threatening here rook g6 and then to g8 to win that bishop. So black now plays bishop takes h6. It doesn't matter, I think now it's completely gone. The position is actually gone. If knight d8, for example, here strong is bishop g5, so multiple threats. This skewering of pieces here is quite dangerous. For example, here, that's starting to win material like that. So there's nothing really much to do here from black. So bishop takes h6 was played, rook takes h6 check, king g7, and white plays a very precise move now. In fact, a lot of moves still retain the advantage, though. Even this just retains the advantage, because if knight takes, we've got e takes check, winning the rook there. So even that, but I think a really precise move though, rook h5, now threatening this lethal check, is on the cards. And it's here that Levon Aronian resigned. If he plays rook takes f7, there's a really sweet move to win from this position. Can you spot it? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now. Okay, rook h7, because this kind of wins like this. Rook takes d7, and in fact the other knights had it as well. Another remarkable game from Fabiano Caruana, who's now on 4 out of 4 in what's one of the strongest tournaments in chess history. An unbelievable achievement so far, beating Magnus Carlsen and now beating Levon Aronian, the number 2. So it seems securing Caruana, starting to secure his the next rating list. He's going to be at number 2 at this rate if he keeps on mowing the field down like this. So what actually happened in this game? I mean, in summary, let's have a quick look again. So black's play with bishop e6 seems quite logical. Was black pushing his luck with this d5? It's just so complicated. I mean, so complex, the ups and downs of these positions. It looks for a moment as though black had a dreamy type position with great f-file pressure here, round about here. You would have thought, white's play is quite modest. Black has committed his pawns. They have very fixed pawn chains, but it looks as though white's not really doing too much right now. And it did actually seem as though even here that, for example, why is there a problem for black here? In fact, why couldn't black even consider h6, for example? I think with a move like h3, actually knight h2 is not such a bad thing to start putting pressure on black's position. So, okay, for here it was about equal. I think where it started to go downhill, it was okay not to take that. Giving up the dark square bishop is not brilliant. The queen invasion, though, might actually be worse. This position is evaluated as slightly worse than if black actually had taken the knight here. Maybe this could represent, in retrospect, a lesser evil choice, this position. If white's forced to play like f3 or rook f1, it seems black's in great shape here. He's controlling that c3 square quite well. Should black really necessarily lose this position? So anyway, yeah, maybe that was a good improvement to play bishop takes g5. So we see this queen invasion, and it seems somehow e5 is being targeted here, and it doesn't matter if the queen's targeting it from h5 or from g3. It seems e5 has become a target. So maybe that's why. Maybe actually, e5 is an issue here, even though black's got the fantastic rooks. e5 has remained an issue. It's been frozen there from earlier. So actually, I'm reminded of Nimzovich, restrain, blockade, destroy. It's kind of been self-restrained by black. This structure has been in restraint, and now white's kind of manoeuvring around the e5 pawn. So in the game, to get rid of this knight might have been useful. It is kind of torturing e5. It is the one that does the damage. in conjunction with the other knight, which seemingly was passive, not doing much. Its entry squares were kept out, it seemed, but it sacrificed itself to actually win that e5 pawn, the queen coming to g3. What an amazingly original idea. I haven't not really seen this idea of the knight sack here, winning that crucial centre pawn. Brings white's pieces flooding through with f4 and e5 later. Remarkable. Here it's just better to play it like the way it was played, instead of knight e5, which allows that attack. Knight a5, just decoying the knight away. So piece sack for one pawn, 2 pawns, and white's refusing the exchange. And there's an episode here, the rooks are kind of without scope here, I think, to get out of this. Okay, so this starts to be very, very tricky here for black, this position. And yeah, it just seems to be going downhill. I mean, let's say black tries to avoid losing the exchange, tries to get his rooks back. Knight h4, say the rook goes back here. This is dangerous for different reasons now. f5. There's like f6 on the card, there's bishop takes h6 on the card. Say something like this. You can see the wrath of the white pieces here coming up. So e6, knight takes f5, this is all dangerous stuff. Any king h7, there's queen g6. Any king h8, there's things like knight g6. So this position is showing how dangerous it is for black. Black doesn't really want to give up another pawn here. It's a temporary reprieve. So it seems as though, you know, Levon wanted to give up the rook, you know, just to keep a kind of the position kind of locked up a bit. So he does lose that exchange eventually here. The rook's really badly misplaced. White is actually threatening queen g6, so that was parried with king h7. So here, looking to win the rook and this. So now knight h4 does actually win the exchange. Any h5, there's queen g6 here. So winning the exchange with 2 pawns, and you know, white's going to expand all his pieces now with g4 and f5. It's relentless. These knights are just not really influencing the position at all. They really are spectator knights, those two, in this particular configuration. So f5, it just seems all the action over here, and the knights are pretty helpless over there. So white's just increasing and increasing the advantage until it's there's nothing black can do in the final position. He resigned here. A fantastic game, really imaginative stuff. It seems, you know, white's position was passive, but there remained that weakness on e5 throughout this game, and that was targeted later, and when it was won, it seems white's position exploded there on the Kingside. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.